understanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hi everyone. It's great to be back for another show. This time my show's on a Thursday, just as a bit of a one-off. Although actually I think my show next month is also going to be on a Thursday. I'm usually on the Monday slot. But I've had to just change things around a little bit this time. So I was, every month I'm kind of, thinking, okay, what shall I talk about on the next show? And I was reflecting on some conversations that I had with colleagues sort of towards the middle of last year when I was completing my thesis. And I was thinking, there's so many conversations that I think we as teachers have where we end up just naturally talking about how tiring it is and the difficult sides of teaching. And I guess just the overall intensity of it all. And I had this chat with my colleague Chiara, and she was just really positive about everything. And I loved it. And I remember thinking, actually, you know what? I should get Chiara on the show and we should just talk about all the great parts of teaching and, the best sides of it, because I think it's just as important to highlight the good stuff, because there's a reason that we stay in this profession. And so I asked Chiara if she would come along and be on the show, and she said yes. So thanks so much, Chiara. Hi.
Thanks. Hi everyone. Hi Seema. Thanks for inviting me.
No, it's great to have you on. And it's funny because I was thinking, since last year, we've been trying to get a date in the diary to catch up, and we just haven't been able to make it happen. So I guess that this is a really good opportunity for us to catch up as well. I mean, we will organize a catch up outside of this for sure.
Long overdue.
Sorry?
Long overdue.
It is long overdue. And we keep bumping into each other and being like, yeah, we need to put it in the diary. But I guess this is just, it's that time of the year, isn't it? Where it's just so intense, and you've got the backlog from block 1 and, the teaching in block 2. And it's just, it's nonstop, I guess.
Oh, it's very busy. It never stops, right?
Yeah, that's true. Until the summer, and then suddenly it's like everything just goes completely flat. Yeah. So Chiara, tell our listeners a bit about you. Tell us about your background, everything.
Yeah. Well, everything is a long story, but I'll just be brief. And so I'll say that I'm a senior lecturer and course leader in communications and media. In particular, I manage a degree, a BA called Contemporary Media Cultures. I've been at SCC, London College of Communication, for roughly 8 years, I would say. And so it's been a while. And before that, it's a long academic history, because I started a PhD in Italy, and this was back in 2009. After a trip to Australia, and I went back to Italy very briefly and managed to get a PhD. And the PhD was in Indigenous Studies and Communications, very broadly. And then I'm not getting into the specificity of the topic, but and it was great. But I felt that there was something missing, which was the engagement with the actual communities and the people, and I felt that it wasn't very ethical to do it from there. And I managed to just go back to Australia for a research trip, which never ended pretty much, because once I was there, I applied for a PhD at an Australian university in Indigenous Studies, and I got it. Then I quit my other PhD and then decided to just stay. And I started my new adventure in Australia, where I did a PhD on Australian Indigenous hip hop, which was a mixture of obviously Indigenous studies, communications, cultural studies, a combination of different disciplines, because it's also, the bit of a nature of Indigenous studies, which draws from different areas of inquiry, different sectors. And so I spent quite a few years there, in roughly around 8 years on and off, and I loved it. I made lots of friends. It was a beautiful period of my life. And at some point, then I decided to leave for personal reasons, for love also, and then decided to, got an opportunity in the United States. So I went to the US university in Pennsylvania, Lehigh University, and I spent a year and a half there as I was a visiting professor. That was my title, but I was, teaching, doing a bit of research, and eventually decided to, together with my husband, to come back to Europe, because we thought it was, much better to be closer to our families, and for different reasons. It was also that time when, around 2016, around the first Trump election, we're not particularly happy about that, and so decided that the States perhaps wasn't the country for us. And then decided to come to the UK because I had a project with a professor from Warwick University. So moved to Birmingham, and then eventually got a position at LCC, and it all started from LCC, I guess. Yeah,
Wow.
that's
So I didn't realize you've been at LCC for about 8 years. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah, and I've been there for just about 8.5 years. So we've
Oh,
been
wow.
there for quite a similar amount of time then. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. And so what got you into teaching in the first place? Like, what drew you towards teaching?
Well, I've always been in teaching. So when I finished my MA in Italy, I started teaching in a secondary school, and then I got a position. The first time I went to Australia, I went there as a secondary school teacher. I was teaching Italian. So I was already very much involved into that kind of environment. And then decided to do a PhD, so to move into higher education. So, quite a bit of a change, but I thought it was really interesting because I had a passion for teaching and also doing research, and I wanted to actually do the teaching at a different level. I also loved teaching in secondary school, but I enjoy also, being in this kind of environment and actually talking to students on a kind of a different level, I would say. So I was always around, in that environment, always surrounded by teachers. My mother is a kindergarten teacher, and so I had a passion, for pedagogy since I was actually quite little, because she used to tell me about the books she was reading, different also, pedagogical strategies, and we still have chats about that. So which is, quite interesting. So I'm also, still, I'm not into so at SCC, for those that don't know it, we've got 3 different pathways. One is the teaching pathway, one is the research, and one is the knowledge exchange. I'm part of the research pathway. I'm not part of the teaching, but still I maintain an interest in teaching and pedagogy. So
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I have to address, because I talked about it when I promoted this show, sorry about that, but yeah, like, we've got to talk about it. You were a breakdancer. So for those, like, I know that lots of our colleagues probably didn't know this. I mean, I'm sure they do now, but yeah, like, tell us more about that, because I love this aspect of, I remember when you told me, I was really shocked, because like, we just know each other, as each other's colleagues, and there's so much that we don't know about, our lives outside of UAL and what we have done or what we do. And so, tell everyone a little bit more about that, and then we'll get into the topic.
That's totally fine. It's not a secret anymore, I guess.
I'm so sorry.
I'm joking. No, it's I started when I was quite young, and in Italy, obviously. At that time, it wasn't very commercial. Actually, in Italy, breakdancing as well as hip hop was a very underground culture. I got into that through, this passion for the music, for the culture, that I got to actually learn through magazines and just music. And then that actually took me to different parts of the world, I've got to say. In 2004, I was a judge representing Italy in Belgium. That
Wow.
was a great experience, for a female competition, and which was an international competition. And that was great. I think, there was the peak of my, I shouldn't say career, because it wasn't a career, but in terms of my passion. And then I also, traveled the world. I went to New York, managed to get together, with people. And the beauty of it is that, apart from the actual discipline, let's call it that way, I don't want to call it sports because it's not really a sport. But, this beautiful discipline is actually that it makes you connect to different people around the world. And it's really easy to find your own people, even when you are alone and don't know anyone, because then it's quite straightforward to make connections and to also get to know people who share exactly the same ideas and the same passion for the culture. So it's nice because every country from the States to Australia always managed to make friends around breakdancing and hip hop. And then that even took me to do a PhD on the topic of Australian Indigenous hip hop, and breakdancing was actually it became a method, an ethnographic method for me, very somatic. It was really about getting to know people through the body rather than through getting too formal and introducing myself as a researcher. I always kind of introduced whenever I could, obviously not, I wouldn't just start dancing anywhere, but I would go to events and gigs, and normally, if there was an opportunity to dance, I would do that. And then people would just come to me, and then we start, chatting. And then I would say, I'm actually doing some research on, this topic. Are you happy for me to kind of organize an interview? And people were happy because we're actually, connecting on a very different level. And so they were not afraid of the researcher and the kind of formality that academia brings. So it was actually really great to have that, because it really allowed me to get into field work in a more, I wouldn't say ethical way, but in a more, in a friendlier way, and perhaps a bit more of a, straightforward way, rather than just, having all those barriers and making things a bit awkward. How sometimes it's a bit hard when you have to make the first move, especially when you have to ask people from different backgrounds, especially very different from yours, when you have to establish a connection. So that really helped as a tool, as a vehicle for getting to know people a bit better.
Do your students know about this, and has it ever been a helpful way for you to connect with them?
Not really, I've got to say. I never talked to them about this. Also because there was never an opportunity to actually talk about that, I think. But with some of my PhD students in the past, perhaps we briefly addressed that. But no, normally, no, I haven't used that. I share my passion for hip hop, which is something great, because sometimes, and I remember a few years ago, I organized this conference, and one of my students found out that I had a passion for hip hop. He was really into it, and so really happy. And he was really shy, and he came to me and he asked, "Professor, what kind of what kind of music do you listen to? And what are your favorite artists?" And he was so excited, because he was really excited, and I was very happy, because I could tell that he wanted to kind of get to know me a bit better on a personal level. And it was really keen. It was really interested in knowing what my interests were. And so I thought it was really nice to have that kind of connection, because sometimes students can be really shy, or, sometimes it's really hard, especially for international students, to kind of, get close to you. And I thought it was really interesting, but normally I don't really talk about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it is nice when you have an opportunity there to strike up a connection, or when students do ask questions and want to sort of get to know you beyond just asking questions about an assignment or, you know, whatever the topic is that you're teaching them.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to touch on that a little bit more. So just a reminder to all the listeners that this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, who are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So if you want to level up your professional development, you can visit hachetlearning.com and explore their full range of titles. Also, got to mention that Teachers Talk Connect is back, and it's the annual CPD and networking conference. It happens on this Saturday, the 14th, actually, in Manchester. So you can join the TTR team there. The tickets are free. So if you want to get hold of tickets, you can go to ttradio.org/connect 2026. So, you know, I was just thinking about the topic for this show, and, you know, like I, of course, started reflecting myself on, you know, what are the best bits of teaching, and, you know, what are the things that really keep me in the profession and make me not want to leave, you know. And I think you know, actually, funnily enough, so this week I was teaching some workshops at another university, and I had like a morning workshop and an afternoon workshop with the same group of people, right? And in the morning workshop, I made this joke about, because we were talking about personal branding and, you know, bold moves that you can make to reach out to people. And I made this joke about like turning up at someone's office with a box of donuts, right? And then when I was there in the afternoon to do the next workshop, this student came and spoke to me about, you know, asking me some questions, and then at the end said, "Oh, by the way, I bought this for you," and handed me a donut. And I was really surprised. I was quite touched by it, because you know, I made this joke and I was not expecting that whatsoever, but I really liked the initiative, and it was just a lovely gesture. And but I don't think that things like that happen very often. I mean, in 8 years, I could probably tell you on one hand how many times things like that really happen. So, but then I was thinking, okay, so let me give this a bit more thought. Like, what is it that, you know, I really love? And I thought of just, you know, I mean, I could give you countless examples of things, and I think this is what we're going to talk about, right, on the show. But I was thinking about my current cohort of MAs, right? And they're really, really inquisitive. This is why, you know, it's great that you just made the point about when, you know, your students try to get to know you. So what I've noticed is they ask a lot of questions, right? And yes, they ask a lot of questions about, you know, the topics that we're talking about in class and things like that. But I've also noticed when we have, you know, a 10-minute break, for example, and I'm a bit of an introvert. So when I have the 10-minute break, I'm like, right, I'm zoning out. I'm not talking to anyone. Like I'll still be there in the room, but I'm just like, you know, recharging very quickly.
Yeah, get it. Yeah.
And usually I kind of, you know, I don't ever say it or whatever, but I'm kind of secretly hoping that no one comes and interrupts that. But these guys, you know, they will just strike up a conversation and be like, "So Seema, what do you think about this?" You know, and it'll be something completely random, like maybe nothing to do with, you know, what I'm teaching or anything else. And they're just genuinely like wanting to, you know, talk and have a chat and get to know me. And actually, I really enjoy it. I don't find myself feeling like, oh God, like, why have you talked to me or asked me a question? Which I think that might have been my instinct.
Yeah.
But what I see in them is this curiosity. And I really love that quality, because I think it shows a lot of promise. And so I actually really enjoy talking to them and teaching them, and love that kind of inquisitive nature that they have. I feel like it makes classes so much more enjoyable for me as well. And it just completely changes the vibe in the room, you know. But what kind of things do you think stand out for you and make teaching enjoyable and fulfilling, and all the things that you were talking to me about when we caught up last year?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, it's really nice when students show interest and curiosity. So I had quite a few students. I've got to say that there is a difference though between MA and BA sometimes, and it really depends on the cohort as well. Because sometimes you've got really, really curious and engaged cohorts. Sometimes you've got, cohorts where the dynamic is a bit different. Perhaps, students are a bit quieter or a bit more shy. And it really depends on the year. Sometimes, it's something strange happens. Some other years you've got some really good and strong cohorts. But right now we've got quite a few interesting students, and it's lovely to see them grow and develop new passions and also new practices, from filming to photography. I wanted to get actually to know a bit more also about what I do in terms of research. I've got a year. She should be in year 3, but she took a year out to do a diploma in professional studies, and this student is really interested in indigeneity, let's say more generically, right? And so she keeps on asking me for advice on things to read, and it's really a pleasure right now, especially in the age of AI, when students really struggle to read. So she asks for recommendations about books, and this is really lovely because I get a chance to talk about what I do, which is not, something that I normally get to do, because of course you have to teach, and the teaching doesn't always revolve around your own research. So in most cases it's, things you're passionate about or interested in, but not necessarily connected to what you are working on. But there are some students who are passionate about actually what we do in our own research and projects. So it's lovely to get to talk to the students about this. But also you've got other students in year 1. I've got an international student from China, and she's really, really passionate about tech. And she keeps on sending me emails about her projects. She's actually currently developing an application for disabled people. And it's really fascinating what she's trying to achieve. So she keeps on, informing me about the developments and what she's doing, asking for advice. So it's really nice to see that kind of engagement and a kind of curiosity, and the fact that, students want to learn. It's a bit more frustrating when students don't want to learn, or they don't engage, or they don't show up. But you get a bit of both, and it's really lovely when you actually get to talk to students and get to know them and get to build that relationship, where you also know the circumstances, what's going on. And sometimes even with the students who are struggling, for instance, we've got a few students who, as you know, it happens, it's normal, they're struggling, going through personal issues. And so I get to talk to them, and they kind of, trust me, and they share what's going on. Also in the past, I had students who wanted to share their personal stories, which is nice. And as we know, there is a really fine line between becoming a counselor and a friend and, being a lecturer. Sometimes that boundaries are a bit blurred. But so it's important to keep it there. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you can't, provide some form of support, or you can redirect the students to actual professionals. But it's also nice to have that honest and friendly chat when students just need that kind of support, sometimes just need a kind word, or perhaps need to know that you are there for them. So while it is important, I always say we shouldn't really confuse the different roles. There are different specialists in different disciplines, and it's important that we're not also providing that kind of medical advice that we're not expecting to give. but it's also lovely, I think, when we're asked to just be ourselves and perhaps just, you know, provide that kind of support, which is more personal than professional, let's say. But yeah, also in terms of, you know, nice stories, I had an amazing cohort, and I've got to say, in 2018, NMA cohort, and I'm still in touch with some of the students. I got some students to organize a conference with me, to do workshops with me, and it was really, really nice. And these students are all amazing people from around the world. And it's so nice to see how after, you know, all these years, they're still in touch, and sometimes they, you know, keep me posted about their lives, what they're doing. And yeah, it's nice to see when that connection happens. It's not easy. It doesn't happen, you know, every year, and it doesn't happen with every cohort, but when it does happen, it's really, really nice. It's a really, you know, kind of, it gives you a lot of satisfaction, and you understand why you're doing what you're doing. I think those we're kind of living for those moments in some ways, right? And but then it's also nice to, you know, it's always good to go through, you know, also the challenges of having to deal with some cohorts sometimes, which might be a bit less engaged, and just set yourself, you know, different kind of interesting challenges, and see what you can do and how you can get them to interact a bit more, perhaps to be part of you know, conversations, and yeah, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so much that you said there that I, you know, relate to. I completely agree, by the way, that it is quite different when you're teaching MAs compared to BAs. And I know
Yeah.
I'll be full of generalizations here which don't apply in every instance, but yeah, I don't know what it is. Maybe there is a bit of a, I mean, partly, yes, maybe we can assume that sometimes, and this is definitely a generalization, but sometimes MAs are definitely more invested in wanting to be there, uh,
Mm.
rather, you know, because it's that step further, isn't it?
Yeah.
Than doing an undergraduate degree. And so you see that engagement. And then also, I also feel like when everyone kind of wants to be there, it's like people feed off each other, and then that also adds to the environment. And
Yeah.
then it's usually a smaller cohort, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's something in that as well, because it can just be that much more personalized. People are that much closer in the room. So many times when I'm teaching BAs, even in fact, I don't teach very many BAs anymore, but
Mm.
I started one unit, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, 2, 3 weeks ago. And of course, we're in March, right? And they start in
Mm.
September. So I
Yeah.
got into the room and I just assumed that they all know each other.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember what happened or what brought it to my attention, but I realized that they don't know each other. And
Mm.
I was quite shocked, because I was sort of like, "Oh, you know, how could that happen, that we're in March and you don't all know each other?" But I guess it's because, you know, it's such a big cohort. They all get put in different groups, in different
Yeah.
classes. They're not always together. And so then I kind of, you know, changed the plan for
Yeah.
the session, and I was like, "Okay, we're going to spend the first half an hour just getting to know each other," because I knew that that would change the way that the next 10 weeks go,
Yeah.
because it will just completely change the vibe in the room. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. There's definitely a difference there with
Yeah.
teaching MAs. I always gravitate towards those units, and there's something I really enjoy about it. But then that's not to say, you know, that I've not had some really, really, some of my best experiences with BAs as well. And, you know, as you said, it varies, doesn't it,
Yeah.
from group to group, year to year.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a thing as well. I always wonder, actually, like, how these different things influence our enjoyment of teaching. So, for example, yeah, the classroom size, whether they're MAs or BAs. I also often think to myself that, so I'm part time, And I always wonder if I would feel the same passion for what I do if I was full time, because I am an introvert and I feel like teaching part time gives me the right balance,
Yeah.
because it is a lot of giving energy. I also wonder sometimes, if I was an extrovert, would that change the way that I experience teaching? Because even when I have a great class and I leave and I'm buzzing and it was just everything that I wanted, I go home and I'm completely dead. I just I,
It's
I
normal, I
I
think.
really struggle to, keep that buzz going. Even so, I can go home and it can seem
Yeah.
like I've not had a good day, but I've had the best day.
Yeah.
But
It's
it's
a lot
just
of energy. It's a lot of
yeah,
energy you put into
it's
your
a
teaching.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
that's even when it's good, right?
yeah, 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 especially
And
when it's good because you put
yeah,
perhaps more energy into it. So yeah,
yeah,
it's really normal.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I mean, are you teach full time? Oh no, but you're not full time because you're on a research path, right? So you
No,
might
no,
be
no.
employed full time.
There's no such thing as a part-time, full-time being on different pathways. It's all the same. So
Yeah.
there's no
I just mean in terms of your teaching time, right? So if you're on a
no,
research pathway, I
no,
guess.
it doesn't make a difference. No, the
Oh,
team,
really?
no,
Okay.
it doesn't affect. Yeah, the kind of pathway you're on. Yeah, it doesn't affect the number of hours. But it depends really on whether or not you're a course leader, the kind of remission that you've got. So I don't do a huge amount of teaching because I'm a course leader. So I've got a lot of administrative tasks. And
Yeah.
but yeah, it really depends because you could be on a teaching pathway or the research pathway. It's pretty much the same. So there are no differences in terms of you have to fulfill a certain number of hours. So you have to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then it just in terms of the ref and the TEF and the KEF, all those, like, so what you are concentrating your research on pretty much. So your outputs. But in terms of the actual teaching, is not really, it doesn't affect that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, it's useful to know that, because I guess yeah, I'm on a teaching pathway, so you just don't. I don't know. I've not really looked into it in detail, so I don't know how it all works. But yeah, that's really good to
Yeah,
know.
and then it really depends also on a lot of other factors. So yeah, normally then it's also a kind of agreement between the line manager and the person. So yeah, it's in terms of what the person or the tutor is required to do. But it's really much, it comes down to the number of hours you've got and the kind of the types of remission that you've got. I've got quite a lot of remission because I'm also a link tutor for Hong Kong. So if I may just briefly talk about this because it's quite interesting
Yeah,
as well. So we've got an articulation agreement with Hong Kong HKU Space, and which means we've got the same degree, BA Contemporary Media Cultures, in Hong Kong as well. And as a requirement, I have to go to Hong Kong once a year. I have to do a bit of teaching, quality assurance, and just talking to staff and students and do a bit of promotional work. And then I liaise, with staff and students, make sure that everything is on par with London. And at the same time, as part of the agreement, students in year 3 can come to London and finish the degree in London and then get the degree from London. So it's quite an interesting thing because also, apart from, I get to experience what it means to teach in London, but I also get the experience of, Hong Kong, which is quite fascinating. And these are two different contexts, and also students are slightly different in terms of, their approach and what they're used to. So it's fascinating to have that kind of opportunity to use different styles. And of course, teaching in Hong Kong, having that Chinese influenced or inspired approach obviously leads to fewer conversations in class, or perhaps students feel a bit more they're a bit shy, let's say, but also they feel a bit more scared of the authority of the lecturer, and sometimes they don't want to say the wrong thing. They're very self-aware. So it's a different environment, different atmosphere, and it takes me normally a good hour or even 2 before getting that conversation flowing and getting them to actually express their ideas. They're very much, more than anything, they're very much scared of expressing their own ideas and making a mistake. So I really have to work hard to explain to them that it's no, there's no shame. It's not a problem if they, even make mistakes or share their views. And it's quite interesting. And when they start talking, then they never stop. So it's actually quite great to see how, there is a different approach, but also how I have to adapt and change. I can use exactly the same approach I will use in London. I have to really shape it in a different way. I have to be a bit more careful also about what I say. And also in terms of, obviously, of any political statements, I can't, make them feel uncomfortable. So we've got some modules which are quite political in London, and in Hong Kong, we have to really be careful because we don't want to put them at risk, both staff and students. So I have to really be mindful of what I say and how I approach certain topics. And also when I, use case studies and examples, I have to use the local ones because we can assume that students in Hong Kong have an interest in knowing about, case studies from Europe or other parts of the world. Sometimes they're very much interested actually in knowing what happens in their own region. So it's quite different, but it's also a nice challenge for me to do that kind of teaching and to learn. Also, colleagues are quite different in their approach, so it's fascinating to see how that they're definitely two different cultures, but how these translate into different modalities within the academic sector and within the classroom.
Yeah, I think it's actually an example I can really relate to, Chiara, because I just literally about just a couple of weeks ago, we kicked off. Actually, it was last week. Gosh, I can't keep up with time, but we kicked off a collaboration. Actually, I think one of your students, a couple of your students, signed up for it too. But we kicked off a collaboration between our university and a university that's based in Mumbai, and so it's like we formed teams of students, and it's like, some of their students with some of ours, and they're all kind of collaborating and responding to an external brief set by a client in the industry. And it's been such a such a great thing for me personally. I've really enjoyed the kind of challenges that it's brought with it, and the insights that it's given me into these wildly different working cultures, right?
Yeah.
And then, as you say, you're kind of forced to really challenge yourself to think about how you approach something, right? Because your normal methods don't apply in this situation. And so I've had to really kind of react to things and do things on the spur. Like, I actually coordinated a call with all the students in India this morning, and I just had a chat with them, around communication. And because we kicked off the project at the end of last week, and then all of the Indian students were on it straight away. So our students were getting emailed over the weekend and in the evenings, and they must have been like, oh, it's the weekend, cool, I'll reply on Monday, And so the Indian students were like, what's going on here? We've been told, like, work on this day, night, everything, like give it your all. And so it was a complete mismatch in expectations and working cultures, and in that context the communication becomes so important, right? But we didn't know, it's the first time we've done it, so we didn't know what to expect, and so we're just kind of reacting and doing things as we go along on the spur. But it's so stimulating as well, and I love that challenge of because it makes what you do interesting, like being put on the spot and having to respond to these new scenarios that are not familiar. And then, and I love that. I love the buzz of it. And I was, my colleague and I, because, then you're working in different time zones and stuff as well. And my colleague and I were messaging literally yesterday, and it was about like 7:45 or something, and I was like, I never work at this time. I just don't know what's going on. But I was sort of loving it as well, because there was it's just so stimulating, the whole thing and the whole experience. And yeah, I think that's definitely another aspect which keeps things, you know, fun and interesting. And yeah, you just learn so much in the process.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just a reminder to you all that this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, who are publishers of professional development books and resources. You know, that supports great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So if you want to level up your professional development, make sure that you visit hachetlearning.com to explore their full range of titles. Also, AQA know that teachers are the real experts in the classroom, and that's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resource tools, training, and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so the chances are that you already know their work. And so as we head into exam season, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. So if you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website to find out more. So Chiara, do you have any, you know, sort of moments that have surprised you over the years in terms of, yeah, anything that's kind of really had an impact and touched you?
Well, I've got to say, as I mentioned earlier, the relationship I developed with this small group of students or women from the DMA in 2018. They were from different MAs, actually, because I was teaching DMA in journalism, lifestyle journalism, and I was also teaching a module for our MA within the program. And so I managed to, because I was running these workshops, and it was really fascinating kind of work that I was doing thanks to a teaching and learning fund. And it was around sound and nature and community work. And so these lovely women, obviously very motivated, very smart, they joined me in these workshops, and they really shared some beautiful moments, because they were very mature, I've got to say, and they were all very extremely smart and with a lot of experience, but extremely lovely human beings, I've got to say. In particular, I got a really strong connection with 3 students, one from Sierra Leone and 2 from India. And they were just really amazing. Through the student from Sierra Leone, I got to know then her cousin, who is a storyteller, and I'm still in touch. I still invite him to SSC to give talks, and we have done projects together with artifacts and virtual reality. So, I mean, out of this connection with one of my students, I actually managed to get other connections and even some research, projects, which was quite amazing. And I will always cherish that. It's one of probably the best memories I've got, also because that kind of transformed into some sort of a friendship, I would say. It's quite rare because it doesn't happen so frequently, and you don't really get to, become so close to your students. But these are really exceptional women, I have to say. And it was really, I spent a lot of time with them, but they were also very mature and yeah, extremely intelligent. So it was really lovely. Not that the others were not. I mean, that cohort was particularly brilliant, but I really connected with the students, and yeah, I still have that beautiful memory.
That's really nice. I think that connection is so important, and it definitely brings a lot of, joy to the profession, right? When you really connect with a student, or you have moments where, yeah, you just, maybe there's a conversation or a realization that you observe, or a growth. It's a bit like when you were talking about those students who you saw them grow in confidence as they started suddenly asking lots of questions, whereas they started off very quietly.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, there's actually so many things when you reflect on that. And I was thinking about that growth too, because so I'm a big fan of Bollywood movies, right? And there's this so we were showing my nieces this movie, and I'd completely forgotten about it, but I love it. It's a movie. It's a bit of a comedy, but there's these two teachers, and they have these different approaches, and they're working with you know teams of students, and one of them has this, the really smart students, very engaged, very, already at a good level, and
Mhm.
the other teacher has all the ones that are considered to not be very promising. And there's
Mhm.
this line in the movie, and he says, that it's harder to take a student from 10 to 40 than it
Mhm.
is to take a student from 80 to 90, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so true. And I think I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and we talked about how sometimes you find yourself gravitating towards the students in the class who are really good,
Yeah.
and talking to them because it just naturally happens, right? Because they're more engaged, and then they're already performing, and then you talk to them, and it's almost like you get more out of it. And then there's always these students who you kind of you get round to them last, because you're kind of thinking, oh,
Mm.
that they're not engaged. And but then I remember we talked about it once in one of our, big meetings and stuff, where the whole team get together. And I remember we came up with this, strategy of let's go to those ones first, because that's when you've got the most, brain capacity, right? And actually, I remember when I started doing that, it just completely shifted my perspective. And I started finding a lot of satisfaction in seeing, I mean, it was hard work, but,
Yeah.
just seeing that growth over
Yeah.
time, and
Yeah.
seeing that taking that approach was really worth it, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Abs-
I don't know, there's like a deeper satisfaction in that, when you
Yeah.
see that you've changed the level of
Yeah.
engagement of a student, not necessarily about grades or anything else, but just
Yeah.
getting them to engage, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah,
true. Yeah, and
yeah,
it's funny you say that because sometimes you notice that that those students are really quiet, really you think they're not engaged, perhaps because they're too quiet, or maybe they're just quite reserved and they don't want to share their opinions in class. And you think, oh, maybe the student is not interested in what I'm saying, or and
yeah,
then you realize, then perhaps it happens because sometimes it did happen. You go out, you organize an event, and then that student actually comes to you and says, oh, you know what, I really enjoyed that, or that made me really change my mind about
yeah,
something. And it's really fascinating because you actually think maybe that student is not engaged or not interested, and it's not true, because
mm,
everybody obviously has got everybody's got different levels of showing their engagement, perhaps, and also different ways of being in just also in their bodies and in class, and ways of showing that they're listening. And perhaps sometimes you think they're not listening because they're checking their phones or watching
yeah,
something, but they especially this generation, they've got different modalities of actually engaging with the content and listening. And sometimes I do ask them, but are you listening? They're like, yeah, sure, I am listening, because they can actually multitask, or they can only listen sometimes if they do something. A lot of them fiddle. They have to do this fiddling activity, either with the hands, or with something at some point, or having to touch or write or engage with the electronic device. But it really helps them with their anxiety, or just with their attention, which seems quite
yeah,
counterintuitive, but this is how it works for some students. So it's really interesting to see that, and to actually get to learn and to know a bit more about this, also generations, younger generations. In there is a bit of a gap, of course, and we assume we know everything, but there are so many different elements, and the nuances that you don't really get to know or learn unless you talk to them. But it happens, normally you get to know about these things when you've got a bit of during informal moments, or when you've got a bit of time perhaps to take a break. Maybe you have a coffee and then you bump into the students, or maybe you have a 10-minute break and that one student stays in class and you ask them some questions, and because you want to know what's going on. And I've got to say, I'm quite lucky because I've got really small cohorts. And so I tend to create a relationship, especially with the students. I think, I see those students who struggle a bit more than others. And so I tend to build that relationship around the break, or when they finish class, or perhaps, just ask them a few questions, and just to get to know them a bit better and to know where they're coming from and their experiences. And so it's quite interesting. I'm quite lucky because I can do that. I know not everybody is in that position and has got the time, or small cohorts, and is able to actually engage with students individually. But this is something I can do. So I'm quite fortunate in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It just goes back to what we said before, doesn't it, about the different things that can really impact all of that. So as we're heading into exam season, AQA know that teachers are the real experts in the classroom, and that's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so the chances are that you already know their work. They're really focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. So if you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, head to their website and find out more. Just a last point that I was thinking about, Chiara, I don't know where the time goes. Whenever I do this show, it's like, I don't know, the time just goes so quickly. But I was, another thing when I sat down to sort of reflect before the show and think about, what are the aspects that really give me a buzz or that I find fulfilling with teaching. And I don't know if you'll relate to this one, but I quite often will update my materials or try new things. I'll just get these like wild ideas when I'm on the tube or on the train, and think, oh, actually, let me try this and see how it works. And but when I'm planning those things, there's always a thing, like a kind of anticipation of, I don't know how it's going to land, right? When I go into class. And I think when you plan something and you get excited about it, and then you go and you execute it in class and it actually works, and it gets the kind of response that you'd hoped for, or even better sometimes. I mean, that doesn't always happen. I've had things many times that have just kind of fallen flat, right? But then there's this like buzz that I get when something just like is a hit. It's like I've imagined it, I've thought about it, I've planned it, and in my mind it's a great idea. But then when it actually turns out to be one, when you're in the classroom, like there's something super super satisfying about that. Like I could be just buzzing for the rest of the day after that. Do you ever like find that that's a thing for you, or do you ever have moments like that too?
Oh yeah, totally. I was gonna say a lot, but not a lot. I mean, if I'm lucky, when I'm lucky, I do get them. It's a combination, obviously. There are moments when you plan something. I want to tell this story because it's not necessarily a positive story, but it's funny. I was preparing this class, and there was a clip, a David Chappelle that I really, really enjoyed, and I thought it was super hilarious. And I thought, oh gosh, I have to share this with my students. They're gonna laugh so much, and it's gonna be super, super interesting, I think, and very much connected to the topic for that week, and blah blah blah. And I was so excited. I was really excited. It's like I can't wait for them to watch it. And then I played the clip, and the students were like, no one laughed. One of the time, and they were like, "What the hell is this?" And it's it's from 20 years ago. It's roughly 20 years ago. And And it was like, guys, don't you think this is hilarious? It was very much connected to that topic, but they were, don't you think it's funny? And like, no, I don't get that humor. I was like, oh gosh, maybe I didn't realize we have a completely different sense of humor, and I have to kind of reevaluate my choices in terms of things that I believe are funny. So yeah, I was really upset, I'm gonna say.
I'm so sorry. I'm laughing because
Oh,
it's just like
yeah.
it's taken me back to a moment where I did exactly the same thing, Chiara. So I can't remember who the comedian was, but I was so excited to show this clip because it's exactly what you said, basically. I was already picturing, the whole class being in hysterics, and they
Yeah,
just stared blankly at the screen.
yeah,
And
exactly.
like no one even cracked a smile, forget a laugh. And I remember just sitting there thinking, like, how is this not landing? Like, how did this go so wrong, but and yeah, I thought the same as you, where I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I've got to evaluate like what I find funny.
Yeah, but I think these are interesting stories. I mean, it's not necessarily a success story, but I think it's a funny one because
Yeah,
sometimes we come with our own ideas of what's funny, what's hilarious, and you see, the generational difference as well, and it could be also cultural, it could be different things, and
yeah.
it's not the first time that I actually decide to show them a something that I think is extremely hilarious, and then it's not. So,
Oh God, it's so true. I
yeah,
kind of love that anticipation though of like not knowing
yeah,
how something's going to turn out. And I think when you've been scarred by things not turning out
yeah,
in a certain way, it sort of feeds into that. But then it also makes it so much more satisfying when it does land.
yeah, yeah,
I always have this joke. So my colleague who I work with on the MA, um, is always laughing because I have this, my guilty pleasure is watching trash TV, like reality
yeah,
shows and stuff like that. Because
yeah,
I'm like, look, I've been teaching all day. I need to go home and watch something that just does not require my brain whatsoever.
yeah,
And I can't engage in anything intellectual, remotely intellectual. And and so I was watching the I shouldn't be really admitting this, but okay, whatever. I was watching Married at First Sight,
mm,
and they have all these like things in there, and one of them is they have this thing called partner swap.
yeah,
So, in the couples, like they change their partner, um, and the idea behind it is the for people to get like a fresh perspective on their
mhm,
relationship, right?
yeah,
And so I then, I made a joke to my colleague about how I'm going to do like a Married at First Sight, inspired class. And then I kind of got a bit carried away in my head. And I thought, actually, that would be a really good idea. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to do partner swap with my students
yeah,
because they work in pairs, and I thought, actually, wouldn't it be really good if I create like a partner swap, and then they have to share their work with each other and get like a completely fresh perspective on it. And so I did it a few weeks ago in class,
mhm,
and it was a big hit. And I remember I was just sitting there
yeah,
and I was just watching them all, like having their chats with their new partners. And I was just sitting there with the biggest smile on my face, feeling so satisfied.
yeah,
Um, and it was like, great, I'm going to do this every year.
yeah,
This
yeah.
this
When
will
it
work.
works, yeah, you have to,
Yeah.
you have to do
And
it.
I messaged my colleague afterwards. I made sure that he knew about it. Because I was like, see, the reality TV's paid off here.
Yeah,
uh,
totally.
yeah.
It's
Anyway,
fantastic.
I've just realized it's nearly 10 o'clock. And one of the things I always do to close the show is I invite my guests to do a mini masterclass on absolutely anything. So, what have you chosen, Chiara, to do for our listeners?
Well, something very fitting, I think. It's different levels of listening. And this is
Great.
something I do with my students. I also teach a optional module called Critical Sound Cultures, and listening is a big thing. So I want to just do a mini masterclass around various levels of listening.
I love it. I can't wait to hear this, actually. Go for it.
So I wanted to do that because when we think about listening, we just sometimes, think it's just listening to words. But listening is actually a skill that we can train. And I do this with my students, especially at the start of this module. So, and I think listening is also one of the most powerful tools for learning, teaching, and also understanding the world around us. So in some studies, but also in education, we sometimes talk about 3 levels of listening. And once you know them, you start noticing that you can, move them all the time, and you can actually choose different types of listening. So you become aware of what you're doing. So the first level is listening for information. And this is the type of listening that most of us are trained to do at school or work. And we listen in order to get, to extract, facts, instructions, information. For example, when we listen to the news, or we're listening to get information about a lecture, listening to directions, maybe, you need to go somewhere, so you ask for directions. And at this level, we mainly focus on what people say. And it's useful, but it's actually only one layer of listening. It's quite superficial to some extent. And then there's another level of listening, which is listening for context. This level is a bit more developed, so to speak. So here we start paying attention not only to words, but also to tone, to rhythm, to pauses, and to atmosphere as well. For example, if someone speaks quickly or slowly, or we try to check if they sound confident or nervous or excited, and we want to gauge the mood of the space we're in. So when we listen this way, we normally realize that communication is never just about words, but sound carries emotion, it carries a certain kind of environment, but also social context. And then there's a third level, relational listening. And there's a great book by Dylan Robinson, who's an Indigenous scholar, who's written about this as well, but in the context of Indigenous relations. But anyway, this is a different thing. But relational listening is really important. This is when we start paying attention to how people, how sounds, how environments relate to each other. For example, the sound of a protest in a city square, or the sound of animals, birds returning when traffic quiets down. And if you remember during COVID, for instance, the beautiful sounds that we never listened to, or, all of a sudden we started to listen to new sounds of animals which were migrating to London even. And then the atmosphere of a busy market, or even a quiet library. At this level, listening then becomes a way of understanding relationships between people and place. And that's where listening becomes really powerful, and also an important pedagogical tool. So I think this is quite fitting, quite interesting also to learn about this, especially, during a radio program. But I also use this for with my students. It's about, it can be used in any class, but I think in my critical sound cultures class is really important, and I ask my students to go out and use different techniques of listening. And I've got different exercises for them as well. We're not going to do this today now, but I want to try a little experiment. So wherever you are right now, pause for a moment and notice 3 sounds around you. It could be, I don't know, a complete silence, but just try to focus. It could be there's a little buzz. It could be the computer. It could be your cat. It could be someone doing something in the kitchen, or I don't know, it could be your kids, if you have kids. It could be anything. Just notice them, okay? And then this simple exercise is actually the foundation of, a different kind of listening. I normally do this with my students when they do sound walks, and it's also an important part of the process of, tuning into the space around them, especially if they feel a bit, anxious. So next time you're listening to someone or simply moving through a space, try shifting between these 3 levels. The first, we said information, the second level is context, and the third is relational listening. So yeah, that's my approach, and hope you enjoyed that. I'm not sure if you're going to try it or not, but I think it's really useful. So yeah, that's my little kind of reflection on listening.
Thank you so much, Chiara. I really love this topic because I always say that I think listening is one of the most underrated skills that we
Yeah.
can develop, right? And so yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for coming onto the show. It's been, I think that we could probably go on for another few hours talking
Yeah.
about positive experiences and the good sides of teaching. And I'm so glad that we did this show and that we talked about this. And I knew that you were the perfect person because
Thank you so much.
I remember that chat that we had last year, and you know, I really loved the positivity that you brought to it around teaching, and you know, that connection that you've developed with your students. And so thank you, Chiara, so much for
having me.
joining.
It was so nice to be here and have a chat, and yeah, hopefully I said something that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just nice to share experiences, isn't it? And those little stories, which I'm sure people hopefully can relate to. So yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a good night, have a good sleep, and I will speak to you again next month.
Good night. Take care.
Bye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.